welcome to Les Bons Mots, a podcast about language learning by ACA, a language training school based in Quebec, Canada. This podcast is designed for people who are learning languages, and each episode will cover a different topic connected to language learning. This week, we're bringing you the first in a short series of episodes about the evolution of the English language. How is it changing? We'll look at new words, changes in how we talk about professions and pronouns, changes taking place in grammar, and how technology is affecting our language. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Britta Potion Reader. I've been teaching English as a second language for over 10 years, and I'm learning French and Spanish. Language is my passion. This week, I'm joined by my guest host and colleague, Johnson Bresnick. Johnson is Director of Learning and Development at ACA and has worked at ACA since 2011. He has taught ESL, and he has extensive experience in curriculum development. He has a background in linguistics and is researching acquisition of grammar in second language learners. As part of our series about the evolution of the English language, we're going to be talking about neologisms, the new words that we'll all be hearing and seeing in the world around us. Let's get started. Johnson, welcome back to Les Bons Mots. It's a pleasure to have you join me for the series on the evolution of English.
Thank you for having me, Britta. It's a pleasure to be back.
So every language changes and evolves over time. And as new words make their way into everyday usage, they can get added to dictionaries. So today I thought we could take a look at some of the new words that have been added in the past year to the Oxford English Dictionary, also known as the OED, the Merriam Webster Dictionary, and the ever-popular dictionary.com. Where should we begin?
Well, I think it's important to start with some words that were prominent in the last year, directly related to the pandemic and the year 2020. We have some very popular words, some new words that arise, some words that we started using different ways. So why don't we look at a few of those?
I think that many of us have heard the terms COVID-19 and social distancing. Perhaps we might not be sure exactly what contact tracing means in English and maybe community spread. Would you clarify those last couple for us?
Yeah, sure. So these are some words that became popular with public health initiatives around the COVID-19 measures. So contact tracing is when the public health identifies a case of COVID-19, they will trace your contacts, trace your acquaintances, and try and create a history of people you have been in contact with so that they can identify those people, contact them, and let them know that they may have a higher chance of developing the COVID-19 virus.
Yeah, so it would be a great time to get tested if you're contacted by a contact tracer. So we see this word evolving for sure. What about community spread?
Community spread is one of those terms to differentiate how the virus travels, how the virus goes from person to person. So originally, the virus came into a country, came into an area because someone was traveling. And when the virus started propagating from person to person in that community, we had to identify it as a community spread. So it wasn't something that stopped with one person as they came back from a trip, but it was the development of the virus through the community, through general contact and general or day-to-day activities.
We talk about coronavirus, we talk about COVID-19, and sometimes we just shorten it as well in English to talk about COVID. When we look beyond coronavirus, we're looking also at how that's affected our life and specifically our work. So I think in 2019, if you asked me to Zoom, I would have zero clue what you're talking about. What do we mean when we say, hey, let's Zoom?
So Zoom is any kind of video conferencing platform. Of course, it's one specific company, but it became the general term to refer to all types of video conferencing, kind of the same way that you would have Kleenex refer to all kinds of facial tissue. So Zoom became the go-to for all types of video conferencing, whether it is FaceTime or Skype, WebEx, etc.
It shows also the fact that we're using it as a verb. It shows sort of how essential this activity has become to our professional lives and in a lot of cases to our personal lives as well. Talking about Zoom leads me to the next thing that I've seen happening and that's been added to dictionaries as well is the abbreviation WFH. This is something we tend to see written a lot in social media posts, sometimes in emails, in chat with our coworkers, but people don't really say WFH. What are we talking about when we see the abbreviation written down?
So WFH has become kind of the acronym from working from home, the phrase that's commonly used for telework or remote working. I haven't heard anyone say WFH. It's more common as a hashtag, for example, in social media or in communications. But it's just the short form of working from home, which has become a new reality for many of us in the workforce.
For our Francophone listeners, this is probably the most natural translation of télétravail. We also use sometimes remote working, but working from home really is the phrase that's most commonly used to describe this phenomenon. We can look at as well at some of the other vocabulary that's come up around dealing with this virus. So I see a lot of PPE written in news stories. What is PPE?
PPE is personal protective equipment. So it's anything that the health industry is using to make sure that their workers are safe, that they are protected as much as possible, whether it's masks, full body suits, all of the things used to protect their workers, to protect the frontline or essential workers, which is also one of the main vocab words that has come up with 2020.
And it's very interesting too. So the idea of an essential worker and this term has really grown and expanded to mean people who are doing any kind of work that helps the basic foundations of our society operate. So we could be looking at truck drivers, we could be looking at customer service people in the grocery store, cashiers, people who are involved in food production or in manufacturing of essential equipment. So it's a term that really has taken on a new meaning in the past year, hasn't it?
Very much so.
Speaking of PPE, we have a new phrasal verb that's entered the English language to mask up. What does that mean? Mask up, Johnson.
To mask up is basically the phrasal verb meaning to put on your mask, to make sure you're ready to go out and keep socially distant, to be in public spaces. And it is very similar to the phrasal verb dress up.
Absolutely.
Or suit up, I believe, is also a popular one.
If our listeners watched How I Met Your Mother, they'll be very familiar with Barney Stinson's use of the phrasal verb suit up, definitely. When we talk about masks, of course, people have different attitudes towards masks, and that's led to some other neologisms, hasn't it?
Yes, especially in 2020, we've seen anti-mask movements, and we start referring to the people who are basically against the idea that the government is allowed to force us to wear masks as anti-maskers.
And when we think about what happened in 2020, obviously coronavirus was a major story worldwide. Another major story closer to home in the United States and also here in Canada is the story of the Black Lives Matter movement. This is a movement protesting against instances of police brutality and racially motivated violence against Black people. How would you describe the impact of Black Lives Matter?
It had such an impact on our social structures, on our thought processes. It was a movement that I think caused us all to reevaluate and reflect on how inclusive we're being, how equal we're being. And it became a very big movement to the point that communities, people, industries were being boycotted or were being called out for not reacting fast enough, for not being involved, for not doing enough in the Black Lives Matter movement. Similarly, with work from home, where it became WFH, we have the BLM hashtag.
And one of the things which was critiqued Throughout the events of 2020, the protests and increased awareness around racial equality is the term structural racism. So this is something that we heard a lot about when you talked about companies, when we talk about governments, we talk about organizations. Could you define this for us, Johnson?
Structural racism, also known as systemic racism, when we look it up in the dictionary, it's the discrimination or unequal treatment on the basis of membership of a particular racial or ethnic group. So this comes from systems, structures, or expectations that have been established in a society or institution. And what this means is it puts a certain race or people who are not included in a certain race either at an advantage or disadvantage. So if the structure or the system is built around one racial group, then it puts all of the other races at a disadvantage. And this affects our hiring processes, this affects our access to resources, this affects many different systems that we have in our society, in our government. It doesn't give people the same opportunities.
And I think the big difference here is many times when we think about racism, we think about the actions of the individual. But when we talk about structural racism, we're thinking about something that's bigger than an individual. It's a process which has become institutionalized that's being
Mhm.
described by this word. Politics sometimes is a source of new vocabulary. And this year, from Canadian politics, in fact, the word lobball was added. What is a lobball?
Lobball, this is a very visual word to me, a very visual expression. So if you're familiar with baseball, you may know a fastball, a curveball. If you throw a lob ball, you're throwing a ball that has a very high curve. It doesn't go very fast. It's kind of an underhand throw. You would generally throw a lob ball to a child or a toddler who you want to provide an advantage to. You want to make it easy for them to catch. So that's used in politics to make the respondent look knowledgeable. You throw them an easy question or an easy topic to talk about. It makes them look knowledgeable, it makes them look prepared, and it can also be referred to as a softball question. These sports metaphors are very interesting because we see them as well in law offices or in politics. People asking questions can throw lob balls, but they can also throw curve balls. So these are questions that are very difficult to answer, very challenging.
And if a reporter is feeling particularly antagonistic, they could even play hardball with the person that they're interviewing. So we in North America love baseball metaphors in English.
It's very true. Sports metaphors in general.
For sure. And while we're talking about, for example, a reporter interviewing a politician, and we're thinking about political life and social media, we come to a new word that sort of bridges the gap from politics into technology. And this is a compound word. So it's made up of two words, but it's written as one word, deep fake. And it's used as a noun frequently. What is a deep fake?
A deep fake is a type of technology that will misrepresent or will manipulate someone's image to do or say things that are not real, that is not actually what they're saying or doing. So it's an altered image or video of someone doing or saying something through the use of technology. One of my favorite examples that came out just in December was Queen Elizabeth's message for the holidays. Every year she puts out a Christmas message. And this year there was an alternate message that was a deep fake to raise awareness about these scams or about these fake videos, these deceptions. So it was a message where the Queen made some jokes. She talked about Canada. She talked about Harry and Meghan. Then she got up and did a dance. And she finished by saying, please pay attention to appearances because they may be deceiving. And the reason they did this was really interesting because it was to raise awareness that not everything you see or hear is real.
With increases in technology, we often have more difficulty discerning what's real, what's fake. If we think about technologies like Photoshop being applied to video, to audio, it can be quite deceptive. So I think that the reminder to think critically never goes amiss.
We see these types of videos in the form of CGI when we're watching a movie and our favorite actor is performing a stunt that is completely computer generated. And we don't realize that there's also this world of deepfake where we can have politicians or people with a certain status that have also been computer generated and that also are altered to say or do something that they did not say or do.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's very interesting to think that we are comfortable seeing that type of technology when it's entertainment, but we don't realize that it can be used as a form of manipulation as well. So deepfake is one of the new words that's very interesting.
It's a great example of a double-edged sword. It
Mhm.
can cut the way you want it to, and it can cut back against you as well. All of these words are quite weighty and quite serious words, and very important words for various reasons. But not everything that made it into the dictionary is completely serious. There are a lot of really fun words that snuck in there. And I'm going to start off with one of my personal favorites. Am I right? So when you listen to it, you think of the phrase, am I right? But when we see it written down, we can see it's being compressed and the spelling's being simplified. Am I right? Into one word, AMIRITE. And this is something that we add often in social media posts or perhaps also in conversation when we're looking for someone to validate our position. We're looking for somebody to give us some support. Oh, here's a chance for me to use another little word that I've seen a lot of in the past year, hot take. My hot take, my controversial opinion is that kale is overrated. So if I want to use the word, am I right? I could say, kale's overrated. Am I right? What do you think, Johnson?
This is a word that comes from communicating online. It's led to a shortened form of communication. It's led to different tone or different intent when we're using this word. How do you see the tag, am I right, being different when it's in the long form versus in its short form?
I think when we shorten it, we're adding almost a wink to what we're saying.
Yeah, so there's a bit of tone or emotion that's added.
So it's similar to other discourse markers that give a connotation of feeling. In this case, there's a little bit of humor attached, maybe even a little bit of self deprecation. So maybe when I say, oh, kale's overrated, am I right? I'm kind of laughing a little bit at my anti kale prejudice.
Whereas if you were to say, Kayla's overrated, am I right? Without it being a very shortened and ending on a high note, your intent might not have that same tone or it might not have that wink, that self-awareness, and it may come off a little bit serious. So though this doesn't seem like a new word, it can be used to convey a new sense or a new meaning.
There's another fun one, Johnson, that similarly to PPE or WFH is something that we see written down a lot. And if you see this word written down in social media, for example, you'll think, oh, goat. I know what a goat is. It's an animal. It says, it likes to eat everything. Maybe it has horns and a little beard. But when you see it written down, it's written in all capital letters, GOAT. What is going on? Are we talking about the barnyard animal here?
I don't think so. I think it's an acronym for the greatest of all time. But I'm not entirely sure. I haven't seen this one very much in social media, so I'm not entirely sure in what circumstances we would use it.
So when we see goat in social media written as all capital letters, often we see it when someone's describing the person who they really feel is an icon, the best of the best. Perhaps for basketball players, they're going to write Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time,
Mhm,
GOAT, something like this.
Or for hockey, you think of Wayne Gretzky.
Yes, potentially, or perhaps you think of Maurice Richard. Could be controversial. And while we're thinking about celebrities, famous people, icons, we can get to our next word, which is an adjective this time. And it's already exists in English as an adjective, but with a different meaning. And that's the word thirsty. Thirsty doesn't always mean I need a beverage. What else does it mean?
Thirsty is to describe someone who wants attention, approval. They're looking for publicity. So they're not thirsty for water, they're thirsty for attention, they're thirsty for the spotlight. We often see this on people's social media posts. So they're fishing for people to engage with them. They're thirsty for some sort of notoriety. So this can be from a post of a picture, or they're jumping on the bandwagon of some movement. But what they really want is engagement from their public.
And this leads really neatly into our next word, sharent.
Sharon. Oh, so Sharon is very interesting. It's a portmanteau, which is a combination of two words that is used to describe parents who share. And what exactly are they sharing when we say that a parent is a sharent?
I would say this is someone on my social media who posts daily pictures and updates and videos of their child eating breakfast, their child taking a bath, their child putting on shoes, their child watching television. And I think really when we think about a sharent, it's about volume.
I think that's very true. It's not necessarily someone who is restraining themselves from their posts. They are posting literally every second of their child's life. And this is a really interesting term because it's become more popular, especially with social distancing and with stay at home orders. And sharents have maybe become a little bit less noticeable because it's become the only way that you can see parts of these lives.
I think you're right. I think sharenting used to be viewed more as kind of a negative behavior when it felt unnecessary. But as you mentioned, Johnson, now that it's a main way that we can communicate with relatives, especially ones that are far away, sharenting perhaps has lost some of its stigma and become a little bit more normalized. So
Mhm.
because we don't have some of our traditional ways of seeing each other and keeping in touch, technology really has become the replacement for a lot of that. So maybe
Mhm.
sharenting is less of a bad word than it once was.
Less stigmatized than it once was.
And that's a cool word too, because we can use it as a noun. So he's a sharent, or we could use it as a
Mhm.
verb. So someone could say, when I had my first baby, I was definitely guilty of sharenting.
Mhm.
Right. But now I've had my second baby, I'm too busy to sharent anything. And that leads us to our next word, which is when we've taken a noun, in this case, adult, and we've made it into a verb, adulting.
Oh, this one's one of my favorites.
Why do you love it?
Because you can use it for literally anything. You can describe your day-to-day tasks, you can describe things that are necessary, you can describe things that you don't like doing, that you do like doing. It all just gets lumped into the category of adulting.
Which is just simply all of those everyday tasks, which are part of life as an adult. So sometimes people say, adulting sucks when they're talking about all of the chores and the tedium. Or they might say, oh, I'm winning at adulting today. I filed my taxes, I did my laundry, I ordered my groceries, and I called my grandma.
This one's very interesting because it takes a positive twist on very mundane tasks, very seemingly boring tasks. And I think it's an optimistic description of these things that are paying your taxes, for example. Cleaning your home can sometimes just be very boring or very uneventful tasks.
Mhm.
And so calling it adulting lumps it in with all of the freedoms that we're able to experience as adults. So for that, I think it's a very optimistic term in some ways.
We've talked about some of the words from COVID, from politics, from general life. We have words that are entering English dictionaries from the corporate world. One that was added this year is the verb slow walk. So obviously there's a literal meaning here to walk slowly, but in the corporate world, what is the usage here?
Slow walk's very interesting because it describes an intentional way of acting or way of working that delays or prevents something from happening. So, an example of a slow walk would be someone who you ask to do a task, and on purpose, they do it slowly and they take their time. Do you have a good example of slow walk, Britta?
I think we would use this word generally when someone doesn't agree with a particular action that needs to be undertaken. And so they're not going to not do it because there would be negative repercussions which go along with
Mhm.
this. Instead, they're going to do it slowly. They're not going to push it forward. And perhaps by doing that, it undermines the action altogether.
So the slow walk is really one person's opinion on the priority of the objective, and that they've maybe classified it as low priority or as something that is not necessary.
Mhm.
And by taking on its responsibility and performing it as a slow walk,
Mhm.
they're actually hindering its progress. That's a very interesting passive aggressive corporate move.
Exactly. Slow walking definitely has that element of passive aggressiveness about it. I think maybe we could take a moment here while we're talking about corporate language to talk about a few words that haven't necessarily made it into the dictionary this year, but that really we're seeing all over the place. And the first of these is a term that I think has gained a lot of popularity in the last years and in 2020 as well. And that's the term side hustle. Do you have a side hustle, Johnson?
I don't.
What do we mean when we talk about a side hustle?
So, a side hustle is your passion project, your second job. It can be a freelance position, it can be selling your arts and crafts. It's not your day job, it's not your principal source of income. For example, if you are passionate about sewing, but it's not necessarily a monetary position, then that could be your side hustle.
So it can be, for example, like a source of income. It's not your main job, it's not your full-time job, but it is something that you do on the side. And in some cases, people want their side hustle to become their main job. So it's something that they're working really hard on. When we have this idea of hustle, we have the feeling of hurrying. So it's something that you're putting effort into, you're trying to make it work. We have this sort of sense of urgency that comes from that word hustle being part of your side hustle, I think.
Mhm. And I think this word has become very frequent in usage because many people in the workforce have been forced to reorient themselves. They have been working from home a lot more, so their time has been different. They have reorganized their goals, and a lot of people have actually been given the opportunity to focus on their side hustles a little bit more, which is really great. One of the positive things about this past year.
And in addition to sort of fun words like side hustle, we can also take a brief look at some of the jargon, which has been really prevalent in 2020. So, when we talk about business jargon, we're talking about those words which have become very ubiquitous. Jargon is language that has a specific meaning within a specific community, but jargon can become a problem when it becomes so popular that it becomes almost meaningless. It loses connection to whatever its original meaning was.
It's no longer
So
specialized, for
sometimes
example.
words in business, in any language, become very popular and then they start to become overused. So perhaps one of the chief offenders that we were seeing a lot of in 2020 is the word content. What does it mean to you?
To me, content is really any material, any media that describes or that is used in social media, that is used in an industry. It's a very broad term right now. I think content is more specifically referring to people who create images or create videos. For example, we see content creators, they're people who create their own videos, create entertainment. So it's something that has, with the boom of people working from home, working on their side hustles, there's been more content that has been developed.
Corporations also seem to be using it to describe any kind of information product as well. The criticism that I've seen of this word is that it's become so general that it's almost the equivalent of stuff.
Yes, it no longer means a specific physical or digital product. It basically refers to everything and anything related to a product or a service. So we'll see a lot more content managers, content producers, and content creators, which can very broadly refer to people who work.
And that brings us to another word whose meaning has changed and become much more general. And that's the word solution. So we probably think of solution as the answer to a problem, but the use of solution has grown and changed a lot in recent years, hasn't it?
Especially on the positive side, we want to use the word solution to show our purpose or show how we can help different companies with the products or the services that we provide. So it's not necessarily that you have a problem and you need a solution, but more so you have a business and you require a certain service that would be a solution. So we'll see solutions that are, for example, video conferencing solutions. We'll see marketing solutions. It can be any type of product or service offered by a business. Very interesting word.
And another of these words that similarly to content and solution has gone from a more specific word to a more general meaning is the word talent. In the past, talent often referred to performers of some sort, could be actors, musicians, were called talent. And we think about words like talent agencies, where we had groups of people who represented performers. But now talent is used in a much more general way. How would you say talent is being used in the corporate world, Johnson?
Talent's being used to describe any person in the workforce, really employees that we can develop, that we can utilize their skills. So it's not a recent change. It's been a shift over the years where instead of saying we do recruitment, we now say we do talent acquisition. Instead of saying we do training, we will say we do talent development. So it's one of those words that has really become the epitome of corporate talk. It's something that's very popular, it's something that's very used, and I'm even seeing some companies start to try and separate themselves from this type of word because it's become so broad and because it's become so general. The avant-garde companies that started with talent acquisition, and it was new, it was fresh, it was exciting, and now every company does talent acquisition, and you start to see some companies try and push themselves away from that term because they want to do something different. They don't want to be in with the trend or in with the big crowds. They want to separate themselves and think outside the box.
Yeah, because really at this point, talent has just come to mean employees.
Employees, exactly.
I can understand that there's a backlash against some of this jargon as it becomes ubiquitous, as it just becomes something that everyone is doing. There's always going to be people then who are going to push against it and try to differentiate themselves, as you mentioned. Well, we've talked about a lot of new words. Let's make a couple of predictions. Are you willing to make any predictions on some new words or some new events that you think might shape English in the next year or so?
For predictions, one that I've seen that I hope comes true this year, and I'm not sure it will, but in the near future is post. So it will be the word that I hope comes into use in 2021, but it might not be till 2022, post COVID, post lockdown. So it's that idea of thinking that we are finally past this pandemic where we had, the words like pre-COVID, pre-coronavirus. Hopefully we start talking about post and everything that we get to do post COVID.
I certainly hope your prediction comes true. I'm ready for some post-COVID activities for sure. I think probably a lot of our listeners are. My prediction is a little bit more tied to technology and social media. And I think that we're going to see the word TikTok make it as a verb. I think it's already starting to emerge here in January. I've seen it around. So my teenage daughter is locked in her room TikToking. So perhaps she's recording herself doing the latest dance. Maybe she's part of sea shanty TikTok, a very unique subgenre of TikTok videos. Perhaps she's creating her own viral video content, just to go back to our corporate jargon.
Yeah, this one, I think it will be a very big word, and it already has become a big word. We hear about TikTokers, who are people who are TikToking, and we see it in the past. I TikToked last night. So I think it's going to be one of those trendsetters, just like we had Facebook with friending and unfriending people, Twitter with tweeting. So I think it will be something that integrates itself into our language very easily.
So we've been talking about a lot of new words that are making it into the dictionary. And perhaps it would be great if our weekly recommendations could follow from that. What are you thinking about recommending to our listeners this week, Johnson?
Well, on the subject of new words and vocabulary, I think it's important to have a good dictionary so that you can understand those words, so that you can integrate those words into your language skills. I recommend a learner's dictionary. This is different from a standard dictionary because learner's dictionaries usually have adapted descriptions. They take into account corpus English, so English in its usage, in its real everyday usage. And they provide definitions for learners, taking into account that English may not be your first language. So one of my favorites is the Collins Co-Build English Dictionary for Learners. It's a great dictionary that has wonderful definitions for language learners. And it's Canadian.
Fantastic. And for people who are looking for new words and perhaps not going to be sitting down to read the dictionary is fantastic for those words that appear that we're not sure about. Maybe we could even add on the idea of a word a day calendar so that you have a different way to sort of build your vocabulary without necessarily having to find those new words yourself.
I think that's a great idea. It's much more appealing than sitting down and reading an entry in a dictionary each day. If you get a little word a day calendar, you sit it on your desk, flip it every day, and you get a new word. And that's a great way to increase your vocabulary and to practice new words.
For my part, thinking about neologisms, a lot of these new words are emerging on social media platforms. So I would say whatever language you're learning, challenge yourself to explore your social media, whether that's TikTok, whether that's Instagram, whether it's Facebook, whatever your platform of choice is, explore content in the language that you're learning. It gives you a chance to see how people abbreviate the language, see how people use language informally, and to see what new words are emerging and what trends are happening in the language that you're learning so that you can really be up to date, understand up to date content, and be able to use these new words.
I think that's a great recommendation. There's lots of content on social media that can help learners and that is specifically designed for language learners. So that's a really great way to keep on trend with some of the changes in the language.
I should note as well that we'll add links to some of the articles that various dictionaries have published about their new words of the year. I'll put all of those in the show notes so that you have access to them and you can click through and read a little bit more about new words that were added to the dictionaries in 2020. Johnson, thank you so much for joining me for this chat on new words. It was fantastic to have you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure as always, Britta, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, I'll see you for our episode on how language around professions is evolving in English.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Les Bons Mots. Come visit us on our website at lesbonsmots.ca. We have a lot of great content on our blog where we post regularly about news, culture, and language learning. You can also see our short language learning videos there. do you have any questions or suggestions? We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at lesbonmots@lesateliers.ca or find us on Facebook and Instagram at lesateliers.ca. Reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about our language training programs, or if you want to talk to us about ways you can improve your skills. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts to help other language learners find us. Thanks again, and happy practicing.